I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York, and this is UN Insider.
Coming up.
There is no further time to waste, nor excuses from any party for further delay.
Urgent calls for a ceasefire in the Middle East as concerns about a wider regional conflict grow.
It's clear that a coordinated international response is essential to stop these outbreaks and save lives.
The WHO issues a global health emergency for a rapidly spreading viral outbreak.
What is clear to all is that there is an imbalance in Council. There is by historical injustice in the non-representation of Africa.
Calls for change inside the UN. A conversation with Sierra Leone's ambassador. Next.
Diplomats here at the UN are trying to avoid a widespread regional conflict in the Middle East. Tensions in the region have escalated dramatically in recent weeks, and UN leaders are urging calm. Tuesday, the UN Security Council held an emergency meeting. It came in the wake of deadly Israeli strikes on a school in Gaza, where hundreds of Palestinians were sheltering. Members of the council renewed calls for an end to the fighting and the release of all Israeli hostages. Jody Jacobs has the details.
Yet another UN Security Council meeting to discuss the ongoing hostilities in Gaza. Tuesday's meeting was requested by Algeria following the August 10th Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced people. According to the UN, this was one of the deadliest attacks on a facility housing displaced people since the start of this conflict last October. Algeria's permanent representative says the Security Council should use its power and consider sanctions against Israel. Briefing the Council, the UN's Under-Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs says attacks on buildings housing displaced Palestinians must be condemned. She says in the middle of the spiraling catastrophe, the humanitarian community continues its efforts to mount an effective response.
The killing, destruction, and suffering in Gaza must end. The hostages must be reunited with their families. But even as efforts to achieve these goals continue, we cannot lose sight of what we consider indisputable. In the absence of a clear path towards a future in which Israelis see their legitimate needs for security materialize, and Palestinians see their legitimate aspirations for a fully independent, viable, and sovereign state realized, lasting peace in the Middle East will remain elusive.
China says the U.S. claimed that Israel had accepted a ceasefire agreement when it presented its ceasefire resolution to the Security Council, but says the reality is quite the opposite.
The U.S., as the largest supplier of weapons, has enough influence over Israel. We hope that the U.S. will take sincere and responsible actions to push Israel to stop its military actions in Gaza as soon as possible and to stop slaughtering civilians.
As the international community continues to brace itself for a possible retaliation attack on Israel by Iran, Security Council members insisted that a ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel must be prioritized. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
From the Security Council to the briefing room and beyond, Shudeja is monitoring the latest developments inside the UN. Deja.
Yes, Elaine, we have a lot to cover this week. Let me start with Sierra Leone's signature event in the Security Council as president this month. The signature event on Monday discussed the increase of representation of African countries in the Security Council. And here is what President Julius Maada Bio of Sierra Leone proposed.
Africa demands 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council and 2 additional non-permanent seats, bringing the total number of non-permanent seats to 5. The African Union will choose the African permanent members.
Well, most of the council members voiced their support for better representation of Africa in the Security Council. But how would member states react that Africa is requesting 7 seats in the council, including 2 permanent ones? I asked President Bill himself. You have a very bold suggestion for the reform of Security Council, including 2 permanent seats and 2 non-permanent seats, and also ask P5 to abandon their veto rights. How much confidence do you have that this proposal will be processed in the UN? Thank you.
If member states want to retain it, it should be extended to all permanent members. And we want to be, Africa deserves a place to be a permanent member of the Security Council. And confidence, we are sure. It's a matter of time. Of course, the gatekeepers will find it difficult to let us in. But as you can see, there is already willingness.
There's a long way to go to get there, but the path was chosen not because it's easy, but it's right. Second, the past 2 weeks, we saw the incursion of Ukraine military into Russia's Kursk region. We continuously asked the spokesperson on U.S. position, and here is what we have. I know I asked you this question several times. Now, does the UN have any on-location or on-site team to confirm what happened there?
We are not on location in that part of the Russian Federation. What I can say is that we continue to closely monitor developments and reported attacks along the Ukraine-Russia border, including in the Kursk region of the Russian Federation. We reiterate our call for all concerned to act responsibly and ensure the protection of civilians. And we further reiterate the Secretary General's call on all parties to prevent further escalation.
One last thing. This Tuesday, Security Council held an emergency meeting on the attack on outbreak school in Gaza City. The session was requested by Algerian mission. Algerian Ambassador Amar Benjama asked the Council to use all tools to stop the fighting, including sanctions.
Our Council must and now fulfill its responsibilities and honor its commitment. Its responsibility to hold the occupying power accountable using all legal means, including sanction mechanisms.
Will other members agree? I asked Sierra Leone Foreign Minister Timothy Kaba. Does Sierra Leone support to use sanction mechanism so far?
If the United Nations Security Council comes up with the proposal for sanctions to be slammed, and if it meets our principal consideration as a country, we will support. But if it is not holistic to bring the conflict to an end and to alleviate the suffering of the poor Palestinian people, and then we will look into that. But I'm very sure the Council is up to the task to ensure that measures are taken to stop the carnage that is going on there.
The most dramatic part of the session was the statements by both Palestinian and Israeli ambassadors. Ambassador Mansour of Palestine asked 6 what-ifs.
Do you ever think, what if you were born in Gaza? What if the prisoner raped was your son? What if the children starving to death were your own? What if that woman killed was your daughter or your wife? What if the disease was riddling the body of your mother, your grandmother? What if that family that was blown into pieces or burned to death was yours?
And the Israeli ambassador Gilad Erdan, in his departure speech, called Israel the most moral country in the world.
I have been immensely proud to represent my country here. The most moral country in the world. The most moral country in the world. You listen, Palestinian representative, in this warped place. I hope one day you will also see the bias and perversion of morality here. And I pray that you will see the truth.
When Algerian representative responded his statement, Ambassador Erdan left the chamber. It's quite a dramatic scene there. And that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudija, thanks. Let's take a look at some of the other issues on the UN's agenda.
3 years ago, a woman in Afghanistan could technically decide to run for president. Now, she may not even be able to decide when to go and buy groceries.
A stark look at the status of women in Afghanistan 3 years after the Taliban resumed control. A new report shows women in the country no longer hold any leadership positions at any level. And 98% of women surveyed say they have little to no influence in their communities. The World Health Organization has declared Mpox a global public health emergency. The virus causes flu-like symptoms and a painful rash. More than 14,000 cases have been reported this year, with 524 deaths. The virus has been identified in over a dozen countries, with most of the cases in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Youth unemployment rates have fallen to a 15-year low globally. The rate has fallen below pre-pandemic levels. But the International Labor Organization says not all regions are seeing the positive trend, and young men are benefiting more than young women.
Coming up.
The question is, can we still have a United Nations with an imbalanced Security Council with Africa not represented in the permanent category?
UN Insider.
I see a country on the move.
There's my opportunity.
Is it good to change so fast?
Yes, but it's a challenge.
We have one foot in the future.
But we never forget our past.
We need to talk to one another.
And listen.
More than 1 billion voices telling their stories. Rediscovering China, only on CGTN.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Changes could soon be coming to the UN Security Council. There has been a lot of talk about reforming the body and its rules. A number of diplomats are pushing for changes to veto powers, and there is also a push to add permanent representation from the African continent.
We cannot accept that the world's preeminent peace and security body lacks a permanent voice for a continent of well over 1 billion people, a young and rapidly growing population, making up 28% of the membership of the United Nations. Nor can we accept that Africa's views are undervalued on questions of peace and security, both on the continent and around the world.
Africa's experience of the UN system over the past 80 years has been one of misrepresentation and underrepresentation. Misrepresentation and the perpetuation of narratives of the continent as a basket case of uncivilized and backward societies who are always recipients of aid rather than agents of progress. Underrepresentation in the exclusion of the continent from permanent membership of the Council, and inadequate representation in the category of non-permanent members.
Better representation for the African continent is one of the key concerns for this month's Security Council president. Sierra Leone holds the top leadership spot for the first time in more than 50 years. I sat down with Sierra Leone's ambassador to the UN, Michael Imran Kanu. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. You've said that you want to be a voice of reason and a bridge builder as president of the UN Security Council. Is that needed now more than ever?
Definitely. I believe in the past 7 months in which Sierra Leone has been in the Security Council, we have been that voice of reason and the bridge builder. And so we see that as a continuation in the presidency. More than ever, we need that bridge builder to bring all of the various, aspects of Security Council. It's not a like-minded organization, definitely states with different interests and priorities. You need that member state to be able to reach out to bring everyone together to address some of the most concerning and pressing issues which we face as a council.
The last time Sierra Leone held the presidency of the Security Council, you and I were not even born. December 1971. What perspective does your country bring at this moment, and how do you hope to make the most impact?
Now, I always describe our history as storied. There's a lot we can share. Immediately upon independence, we became a member of the United Nations, and in 10 years we got elected to the Security Council. We also contributed to peacekeeping. We were quite the strong voice on decolonization. So we had already shown that we're active participants in international affairs. Moving on from our last presidency, we also suffered our own difficulties. We had a decade of civil conflict, but we've had 2 decades of peace resolution, peace building, and democratic progressive governance. And we want to share that experience at the Security Council, and I think that comes in quite valuable, and so far that experience has helped us and guided us in our interactions with situation countries, particularly in Africa.
And that is one of your big priorities this month, is conflict prevention.
Exactly.
You feel like you bring unique perspective.
Well, conflict prevention is important. Certainly, the Security Council has to deal with the conflicts that now you find all over in the world. That's an important responsibility. But we have to find a way of preventing conflict, and there are ways in which we can do this. There's a role for Security Council in looking at how do you address conflict prevention and peace building. We have a good example in Sierra Leone in implementing what we call the SG16. We have an independent commission for peace and national cohesion. That practice is something that we want to share. That is why in one of our signature events, we'll be dealing with conflict prevention and peace building. And then we have to deal with the other aspect. The other aspect is really the nexus between peace and development. The only way you can really, prevent conflict is to ensure that there's inclusive, prosperous society. And even though that is not directly the mandate of Security Council, we do see that link, and they need to address the root causes of conflict. So we bring all of that, as the Secretary has done in his new agenda for peace, and we just want to use that debate as a basis to build momentum towards the summit of the future.
One of your other big priorities is reform at the Security Council, which that issue isn't really new, except that you feel that there needs to be more African representation. Do you feel like the council is ready for change? Can that change happen soon?
I describe the common African position on Security Council reform as a demand, and that's how we look at it. Whether the council will be ready for change or not is a separate question. But what is clear to all is that there is an imbalance in council. There is a historical injustice in the non-representation of Africa in the permanent category and underrepresentation in the non-permanent category. The discussion on reform has been going on for long. One could say since the establishment of the United Nations. Well, in this present formulation, it has taken 15 years. We think there's a need for a momentum shift. There is wide support for the common African position in the UN General Assembly, where we have these negotiations. Having a discussion as a priority during our presidency in the Security Council is to, as I said, elevate that discussion, bring into narrow focus the historical injustice. And so we build momentum again to the Summit of the Future, where we have a declaration for the future. But we also get to the 80th anniversary of the United Nations. It will be 8 decades. The question is, can we still have a United Nations with an imbalanced Security Council with Africa not represented in the permanent category? I think there's a moral imperative on all, whether you accept or not, for that change to happen.
Do you feel optimistic then with the incoming President of the General Assembly representing the African continent, your position at the Security Council, that more and more African issues are coming to the forefront of the United Nations at this moment?
Well, we look forward to the 79th presidency of the General Assembly. Certainly having an African representative will be critical. In the present composition of the Security Council, we have 2 members of the C10, so that's the African Union Committee of 10 responsible to really advance the common African position. And we've used our presidency to really spotlight the issue with, the active support of Algeria, the hope is that when we do have an African president of the General Assembly, we also focus on reforms of the institution, because I think that's a key priority, and looking at the historical injustice.
A lot of eyes have been on the situation in Sudan, the violence and the humanitarian crisis that have spread past its borders there in that region. Also a big topic at the Security Council this month. Is it too late for diplomacy and dialogue in that situation?
It's never too late for diplomacy. Diplomacy must be the bedrock of what we do. Sierra Leone could be and is an example for Sudan, where you have to deal with the various tracks. You have to have a cessation of hostility, which is a priority. You have to support the efforts of the personal envoy of the Secretary General in that regard. You have to have coordination of mediation efforts. You have to address the humanitarian crisis. But we also have to support the AU process, which is leading in terms of the political dialogue. For you to have lasting and sustainable peace in Sudan, that political dialogue really must be supported and come to a situation where the Sudanese people will argue on how they see Sudan going forward.
China-Sierra Leone ties go back more than 50 years. Your president was in Beijing a few months ago, meeting with President Xi Jinping. There's a lot of investment and development involved there. How would you describe this relationship?
It's an excellent bilateral relationship where there is mutual respect, it's mutual supportive, and that is what we really appreciate about China's approach to foreign policy and engagement with, in this case, Sierra Leone. As you say, we go way back. There's been 2 state visits. President Biu recently visited President Xi in China, and bilaterally in terms of engagement in economic prosperity and sustainable development, we've deepened that as well. We continue to cooperate very well at the United Nations. I see that as only going forward in the right direction. Of course, as you say famously in China, it's a win-win scenario for both of the states involved.
Ambassador Michael Kanu, thank you so much for joining us.
I thank you so much for inviting me to share a perspective. Thank you.
UN Insider.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Sunday marked International Youth Day. Globally, there are nearly 2 billion people between the ages of 10 and 24. Close to 90% of them live in developing countries. By the end of 2030, 57% of the global population will be age 30 or younger. Right now, millions of children worldwide lack basic proficiency levels in reading and mathematics. The UN Deputy Secretary General says investing in education is a global imperative. She has called for making 2024 a turning point for education and deliver on Sustainable Development Goal number 4, a child's right to education. Zhang Zhan is a primary teacher in China working to ignite children's desire to learn.
2年级的时候，我们认识了米和厘米。那么，其实还有比米还要大 的单位。非常好。那1000米到底有多长？我从小学到中学到大学，遇到了好多特别优秀的数学老师，他们都有着扎实的学识，而且他们特别认真负责，引领我们去学习，然后让我感受到了数学学习当中的这种快乐。后来我就成为了一个数学老师，然后当我走上这个工作岗位的时候，我就觉得其实没有我想象中那么简单。
起点是放学的门口，终点是麦当劳。我走了1692步，用时12分29秒。我们世纪小学的操场跑道1圈200米，跑5圈也是1000米。谢谢大家。
钟天伟，德乐器他准备的非常充分，从学校门口到麦当劳走了多少步和他的用时，连秒都计算出来了，
真是特别厉害！来，掌声，感谢。因为咱们2022年课标，特别提到了核心素养，就是我们理念上首先要改变。当你理念改变了之后，你会不由自主的会改变你的教学行为。那现在我们要培养孩子的是核心素养，比如说量感。接下来，想不想去操场咱们试试？咱们带着队伍小跑跑到那儿，然后再跑回来，行吗？行。或者如果你站在孩子的角度去体会比如说1000米，就这个数据对于孩子来说可能是很抽象的，但是通过这个活动之后，孩子们深有体会，就觉得哎呀，是不是有些累呀？是不是很长啊？包括这种量感就出来了。两队这边，我们交流一下感受。来，你说。刘梦琪，
我爸爸开车1公里也需要1-2分钟，所以我觉得，假如不堵车的话，那也需要30秒，所以我觉得1000米这个长度挺长的。
那1000米我知道1000米有多长。
刚才我们一开始对1000米是不是只是数据？今天你再去放学的时候，不要仅仅是走一走，你还可以怎么样？去感受一下。他今天走出校门的时候，可能就是平时我可能就是看看花草啊，但今天可能就会真正自己去感受。
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider.